Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This week is show about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Midnight Club, Season 1, Episode 7. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, I went into this episode knowing it was going to be about Anya because the episode title is that, but I wasn't sure how they'd approach it. And then we got the sequence that we got, and I wasn't sure what that was. Obviously, we got Anya at working at a store, and at first I'm like, oh, is this like a little before she got sick? Well, we know, like, based on the conversation she had with Ilanka, that she was just working on ballet and stuff like that. But I'm like, maybe this is like sometime after she got diagnosed or something. But then when you actually look at like her at the job and stuff, I'm like, nah, that wouldn't be Anya. Because we don't know how much of Anya like that we've kind of gotten to know over the course of the show. It's who Anya was before her diagnosis, before everything kind of went very like topsy-turvy and everything got pretty rough. Like, we don't know if she was like always kind of, mean, but, a deep, mean in her own way, or, very sarcastic. We don't know how much of that was just Anya, once again, a defense mechanism for everything that she went through, or whether that's just who she was even beforehand. So, but she's just kind of living her life, and that's why, like, I start going like, okay, I was like, there's no way this is actually just going to be like a no, she's like, because then I start thinking like, okay, is this a bit of a dream sequence? Are we going to find out, like, because I start thinking like, is this almost like the shadow got her and now it's trapped her in this loop and she's kind of living this fake life, but it's actually this thing kind of messing with her, like the shadow. Because the shadow, I wasn't sure if that real, or is that just supposed to be like a metaphor? Because obviously it's like metaphorical for like death coming for, but I didn't know if it was actually going to actually be like a demon or something shadowy, actually. Either way, she's living her life. And I do love that TV show, what she's watching, Order and Reprimand or something like that. And I love the second episode, the second recap. They're like, oh, previously on Order and Reprimand. First and foremost, kind of a play, I'm sure, like on many police procedurals, but obviously with like Order and Reprimand in the name, you kind of think like Law and Order. But they made reference to Dusty's crime. I was like, oh, that's neat. That's a little interesting, because like when they figured this, like, I'd already had the notion of like, well, this has got to be some kind of dream or something. But like, especially when that kind of reference, like Dusty's murder, it's like, oh, like she was killed in her sleep with a hammer. And it's like, oh, what about the boy? Wrong place, wrong time. Just like, Dusty's previous victim was that, which is very befitting, because who played that character in the story that died? It was Anya. And it was, so I was like, oh, it's interesting now, like Anya, now we're in Anya's story, and that ends up happening. So I thought that was so fascinating. And also, I love the David Caruso of it all. I keep using that as a reference point for that type of thing, but I don't know if that's the only show where that's what I think it is, especially a police procedural. Like, if you don't get the reference I'm making, David Caruso was the lead of the CSI Miami show, and every cold opening, he'd make a reference to something. So, like, he'd have his shades off, and he's like, well, and he'd make a pun or something, because, like, that guy's like, well, they might not have been drunk, but they ended up hammered. That was like, that's the David Caruso of it all. Like, that's like what his character would do. He'd make like a one-line stinger pun like that, and then you get into like, and then it hard cut to like the title sequence of the show. So that's why I'm almost like wondering, like, is there any, like, that's will always be the David Caruso to me, but I don't know if there's any other, like, that's my only reference to that. I don't know if there will be any other reference than that. And I'm also thinking, like, I don't know if that's a well-known enough reference. Like, I mean, which is weird, because I'm 30, and I don't know if most 30, like, people my own age would get that reference. I only know it because I watch a lot of crime dramas, especially police procedures, because my mom would watch a lot of them, so that I started getting into them. So, I don't know. That's just that I'm going on a huge tangent, but that's what like immediately crossed my mind. I was like, oh, but I did also think it was interesting too, because obviously this is supposed to be Anya like 2 years after everything went down, after the events of last episode. This is supposed to be 2 years later, and she's trying to find a way to move forward. And for her, we find out, because even her boss at the store was like, hey, you need to find a way to kind of like have other hobbies and stuff like that. Like, because I guess it's just like things just kind of haven't always worked out. And I think that's the sad thing of like, she got a new lease on life, and like, she's just kind of going through the motions of life, because she's beating herself up because she's the only one that survived. It like she got sick, really, really sick, but then she got better, just like Julia. But then they repeated it over and over again for the other 6, and it didn't work out. She's the only one that survived, and so she has guilt that like it worked on me. My friends did everything. They did something batshit crazy. I was the first one up. I mean, especially because she knows what they gave up for her, and it's like we repeated it 6 times and it didn't work. None of them. It seemed like particularly the Amish one was pretty rough because the moment she got the Amish, she kind of like stammered a little bit because it sounds like his death was pretty rough. And then like I think the ones that affected her the most were probably like Amish because it was probably pretty like, I mean, because we know like his disease once again is kind of like eating away at his brain, so I think that must have been pretty bad. But then also Ilanka like was her roomie and became easily kind of like her bestie. So I even love that story. What is it? Spontaneous regression for her situation. And she's like, yeah, I had a roomie who was all about that, who kind of told me that. And what did I do? She's like, I laughed, you know? And she probably like never got an opportunity to apologize because she realizes like, yeah, it was kind of a dick thing to do. But she was also like, right, who I was at that time, like I wasn't open enough to the thought of something like that. And now, you know, and she even says this line later on I thought was interesting where she was referencing like there is no magic. Spontaneous regression is just basically the infection basically kicks your immune system into overdrive to make it do what it was always meant to do. So it isn't really magic. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, kind of almost saying like there was no magic in Julia's like healing. It's just her body like got an infection most likely and her immune system kicked in and did what it was initially supposed to do. And that's the only reason why she walked away cured. But she even said that wherever that friend of hers, where her roommate was, she's like, I hope she's laughing, you know, kind of like at me. And she was like, yeah, I mean, I think that's what she deserves, you know, to be able to kind of laugh at me about like, oh, like it worked out and I'm cured and everything. I laughed in your face about it and it ended up being a thing and that's the irony. Like, hey, I laughed in your face about it and this very thing, because it wasn't magic, ended up being the thing, ended up saving me in the long run. So, but like also once again, it's like the guilt eating her alive because once again, that's what's kind of been eating at her the most is because she made so many mistakes that she's been beating herself up for. And it's just like, I think once you're kind of stuck in your ways, like it's hard to go back. So that's why probably she leaned into like the mean girl, like, tropes and aspects of her personality, because once again, it was her way to compensate. It was her overcompensating for everything, but also I think it was her way to kind of punish herself to some extent because of just everything between her and Rhett, which she did call him up to try and repair their relationship. And it was kind of going in a nice enough direction, but it's just like everything was eating her alive. She's like, I called you up because I just want you to tell me that everything's okay. Because she kind of gets pissed at him. It's like, you left when I needed you. And she's like, yes, I know I walked away, but you could have like tried and find me. You could have done that for me. And I think for her, it's just, I needed someone to tell me it was okay, you know, and that everything was going to be okay. And she's struggling with everything. And now it's like, because I think that's also why she's in the group that she's in, because it's Survivor's Guild. It's a survivors group of that. It's like, right, like I happen to survive this thing. And I even loved how, and it's so heartbreaking the way she puts it. It's like, this thing has defined me for so long. Cause it's been like, cause it's the guillotine above your head. It's like, for so long, it's like, yeah, this guillotine could come down at any moment. We don't know exactly when. We could give you the rough estimates. You're always like, oh, it could happen at any moment. And then all of a sudden the guillotine's going, you're like, wait, what? I've lived in my life with just like this shadow over my shoulder the entire time. And now you're telling me, oh, I'm fine. You know, and it's like, she's like, but that she feels like it ate part of her that she can never get back, the good parts, and what's left, that all that survived, it's all that's left. And so for her, it's almost like I have nothing to show for it. I've lost bits of me that I can never get back. I'm always going to have that feeling of like, right, so much of my life was defined by that. Now, nothing of me is left to live the life I've been given. Plus, the friends who helped make sure I got this life aren't even around anymore, so I can't even share and bask in that with them. So it's a very, very heartbreaking story. She's trying to do the ballet thing, but I mean, and but she stops herself because she's outside the window trying it out, but then like she tries it, but it like kind of makes her prosthetic click, and she just no, and she just immediately stops. But then there's the whole thing on the radio I thought was interesting, and then like because first it was like Kevin's voice and then it was Spence's voice, and I was like, it wasn't until it took me a long time before I figured out like, oh, okay, what that is, because I was like, so it kind of went, it kind of linked like what ends up, I was kind of right on the dream sequence type of thing, but I thought was really interesting when everything started like collapsing, because like someone brought up the hammer for her to check out. She looks and it's Kevin's mom from the Dusty story, the Wicked Heart story, and you're like, wait, what? I was like, and then slowly but surely, like all those like other stories started bleeding together. So part of me wonders, is that like subconscious? Well, because those are stories are like in her subconscious, so, and it's her ties to her friends who she misses so much. I didn't think it was almost kind of like it all kind of like maybe her mind grasping onto those, you know. I guess it's almost like that thing, jumping ahead a little bit, like when you're nearing the end, I guess it's like your mind grasps onto whatever it can, and those were that what she had left, and you know, because when it's all said and done, all you have sadly are those stories, and then like I said, it was just kind of like crazy and mental how that whole sequence started playing out. Once again, her like bumping into one story after the other, then falling into her bed, and then like the creature from the top of her bed like oozing out towards her. And then she's hearing the others talking to her. And the moment they start talking to her, I'm like, oh my God, they're like, she's in a coma and they're basically reading to her and she's hearing it. And because she was breaking down at that point in time, and then she's listening to everyone as they're like making up stories about like what her life would be. They're like, right, once you wake up, then we're going to perform the rituals on all of us and we're all going to get out of here. Then we're going to get our own apartment. We're going to get an apartment complex together. We're all going to live together. And you and Rhett, like you're going to be at it. Your dance, like you're going to get back into ballet. Then Rhett's going to come and happen to pass by at one point. You guys are going to make up and get together. White picket fence, happy, married. The rest of us will grow old together because we ended up buying the houses in the neighborhood too. And so you're not going to get rid of us that quickly. You ended up having like, what was it? Sandra did MASH. So it's like, yeah, you got 2.5 kids. And it's like, right. So you round up and it's like a nice 3. And it's like, and you also get the fluffy dog. And so I thought that was so beautiful. And I think in that moment, them all trying to like comfort her, and especially Alanka being the last one, being like, "I'm sorry." She's like, "What we found out is that Stanton found them and ripped them a new one, Alanka in particular." And it's like, yeah, but she's like, if I knew things were going to go down this route, I shouldn't have, like, because she grew to regret it, because obviously Anya didn't have a lot of time already, and it's like most of that time has been, you've been put in this position where you're basically in a coma for the rest of whatever time you had left. Because I think at that point it maybe had been a full week of her being in that state, because that was the whole thing of like, yeah, you disappeared for a week and you came back and you were healed up, and once again you did it for the rest of us, because they were like applying Julia's story to hers. Well, because Julia was going for like a month, wasn't she? I don't remember. Because I think Alanka changed the time frame for when she told the story in episode 1. But Alanka started kind of like apologizing, saying like, feeling bad that she kind of did all this and kind of put Alanka in this position. But there was like this beautiful notion of like, at the very end, her thing was she didn't want to kind of be alone because she was the only one. And in that moment, like, everyone's there in that apartment with her, and she's crying and laying down in her bed. And Lanka's talking to her, and then like back in the real world, like, I think it's just kind of, I don't know whether that was her like technically opening her eyes one last time, or whether that was like still like within the dream of it all, her like being back at Bright Cliff and being like, good night, because she was like, I love, I think it might have been previously where she was like, no, it was like, yeah, it was like, when she told her like, I love you, last episode, and she was like, I love you too, and I was like, I thought that was beautiful, and then like Alanka being the last one to talk to her, obviously it meant a lot. And yeah, Anya died, and I was like, Jesus, because I was like, okay, she's going to survive, but like, it wasn't going to work. I didn't expect her to straight up die, and it's like, and I guess I should have figured as much, but still, it's like, that sucks, and that janitor, like, his words of wisdom, interestingly enough, because he talked about like what kind of a strong person that Anya was. And kind of talks about it in a sense of it's about, it's not just about the death, it's about the life lived. And it's like that girl, she lived deep. And Alanka was like, yeah, she could be kind of like, person, she could be a little bitch, but it's like, no, like at the end, it's just like, once again, because it hits hard too, because Anya is the one who looked after everyone. Because even, last episode, Spence even said, like, yeah, Anya told him, like, hey, if anyone ever messes with you, you come talk to me. And he's like, no one ever did because of her. Like, the fact is that she was, and once again, she may have been mean in some regards, but she was very, very protective of everyone. And it's like, for them, it's like the person that they looked up to, who they cared for, who cared for them so wholeheartedly, was very blunt and kind of spoke her mind. Now she's gone, Because even Alanka made a reference to, like, I think either it was like a John Lennon quote, basically being like, from going from like life to death is just basically going from one car into another. But she was like, you know what I say to that? She's like, fuck that car, fuck the car, fuck cancer, There was even that Emerson quote that the janitor quoted that I thought was so beautiful. That basically, like, when you die, it's not really dying, you're just retiring for a little bit, and then eventually that spark of what you are, like, a kind of returns. So it's almost like not necessarily a reincarnation or anything like that. I mean, maybe that's like a mild, like, version of that, but I like that it's not like a permanent thing. It's like almost like there is no like full death, because it's almost like you'll always come back. Your light will dim for a little bit, but then you'll come back, you'll return again. I'm butchering the quote, but it was like an interesting Emerson quote that I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So, but obviously Stanton like chews into Alanka about everything. It's like, right, you did what you did, but it's like Alanka's like, right, we wasted the time that Anya had, and she didn't have that much left. So if you're going to kick me out of this place, kick me out of this place, because I've already beaten, like, I've already got too much to deal with, because Anya left her so much. It's like, left her the money in the account, which is like, wait, I don't want the money. It's like, yeah, Anya didn't want it either. So, but it kind of goes to you, along with all these other things, even a letter of what she wanted. And so later on, the Midnight Club meets up and reads her letter. And she was basically saying that, if she hasn't reached out, then that means that there is kind of like almost like nothing on the other side or something. Or I'm blanking on what exactly she had said, but it was her kind of like saying goodbye to everyone. That she was saying, like, if this is how it ends for me. And even they are like, right, I don't even know do we even tell any stories, or they just feel like it's inappropriate considering circumstances. And then Stanton shows up. She's like, right, she's like, I don't know why you guys assume like I didn't know about, just because I didn't stop you didn't mean I didn't know about the Midnight Club. It's like, who do you think keeps leaving out the fresh wood for you to burn for the fireplace? And they almost had to stop. I think it was like Spitz, Notsky, and Amish being almost like, wait, we didn't ever thought about that. And for her, she liked the knowing that, like, oh, the fire was burning, and that the stories are what matter. They're the stories that have kind of carried over since the Midnight Club started. But now she's like, what am I going to do with all of you considering what you did? She's like, I don't have very many rules, but I give you so much freedom and agency. That's what you have here. Do I have to restrict that from you? Because she's like, do I have to lock you in your rooms? I don't want that, but still, But at the end, they gave Anya a very proper burial. And Sherry, they ended up doing a rendition of Good Riddance by Green Day. I knew the song when they were singing it, but I was like, why do I know this song? It sounds so familiar. And Googling it really quickly, I'm like, oh, it's a Green Day song. I was like, oh. And now in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, it definitely sounds like a Green Day, because I think I've heard I've heard the song at some point in time. It's probably not the Green Day song, because obviously when I think of like Green Day, like obviously my first introduction to them was like Boulevard of Broken Dreams was like my first introduction to Green Day. Either way. So when I'm hearing that song good, I was like, yeah, why does that sound so familiar? It's like, that's why. Obviously, it's not going to sound like exactly the same, because it's like they're doing kind of like a violin, almost like somewhat acapella acoustic like rendition of it, so that's why it sounds even different. So, but I was like, it was like a beautiful, beautiful thing. It like it reminds me. I'll go ahead and say it. I won't go into details. Especially the singing together part reminds me of the season 4 finale of The Magicians. It was it had that same vibe and feel to it. But I thought that was kind of a beautiful like goodbye for Anya, and even Alanka wanting to stay into the water until it made her body numb, and then like she tries to kiss Kevin, but he's like, whoa. She's like, I'm sorry. He's like, no, I'm sorry. He's like, you don't have to like basically don't hold all that in. Like, we're all already going, but he's like, fuck, that's not what I meant, and just kind of walks away because I think he's frustrated. I think it's just like, right, it's just losing Anya, and now it's just like he was trying to say something to make her feel better because it's like, right, we're all kind of doomed, but it's also like, right, she's the one that kind of held on to this whole, no, like this could save them because if it could save Anya, maybe it could save all of us, but now it just kind of solidifies it all for them that there kind of is no saving. I mean, even Tim showed up for her, and he's like, "I'm sorry about it." He's just like, "I'm just sorry," and that's heartbreaking that things kind of played out this way. She did run into Shasta, who had told Alanka, like, right, you did what you did your best, and that's what meant a lot to Anya. And she had talked about the fact is that her and everyone there, once again, it's that thing of like the Paragons had the right intentions, but it's just a situation of they kind of ended up losing their way. Talking about more so about how, what was it? Almost kind of like the natural world and like how they'd kind of like sullied it a little bit and just kind of like the magic, because she was like, yeah, like this place had, there's always been something special about this place, and now because of that, like people like UFO people, because like she's like, if you fly a plane over this area, it will like mess with some of the machinery a little bit, so like this place has always been, but she's like, people don't kind of respect like the nature of it. It's kind of what she was saying. I mean, how powerful that actually is. So she's trying, in the long run, she was trying to make Ilanka feel better, being like, right, there's, you did what you could do, and yeah, it didn't necessarily work out with Anya, but she appreciated you trying, because that meant the world to her all on its own. That people would go out that far for her. The sad thing is too, like Alanka tried to call Rhett, but she couldn't get in contact with him. So like either it's like an old number or something, and it's sad. Like right, in that dream they couldn't make up, but like in the story that they told, she did, and and they ended up having a beautiful life together. And I think at the end of the day, once again, kind of what the Midnight Club is about, those stories, they matter, in the end. And I think that story in the end mattered to Alanka because it was just more proof for her. I'm getting a little damn choked up thinking about it again, Jesus. It meant the world to her to like know, like kind of in the end, like, that's always the thing of like, right, we come into this world alone and you kind of go out of this world alone knowing like her friends were by her side, and those stories stayed with her. She had that comfort, as she went into, I guess, the long sleep, I guess you can kind of put it. So it's just a heartbreaking situation. And even knowing that it affected Stanton the way it did, because for her, it's like, oh man, this girl, she was so fierce and how much it meant to her. There was a photo that she hung up back in the hallway, and I'm like, I don't know if that has something to do with Julia or something. Like, was she hoping that Julia, like, this would somehow be a repeat of the Julia situation, even though she was the one telling them, like, in particular, Alanka, like, oh, you just kind of have to accept it and try and make her as comfortable as possible, right? There's also, she was on the phone with somebody, and she kind of talks about one of the others isn't terminal. One of them gets to go home. And you'd almost go like, you'd assume it'd be Alanka, but I don't know. And I'm curious, would she say anything to the others? Because now it's going to be a thing of, well, who gets to go home? And I think that's going to be the sad thing, because in Anya's story, like, it was like, oh, Anya got to go home, everyone else died. This might be a repeat of that. So it won't be Anya going home, but someone else will go home. And once again, you kind of feel like just because they set her up to kind of be the main character, because all this crazy stuff that's happening to her, you'd almost think it was Alanka, but I mean, there's a good chance it might not be. But we'll see. Stanton did burn the book Because she had asked Anlanka where she got it. It's like, I honestly, she's like, I got it out of the damn library. It's not like I really like had to go far to look for it. It was in the library in the end, and I'm like, because it almost seemed like Stamp was almost surprised. It's like, wait, it's been in the library this entire time. So I don't know, because like Julia had to be the one who left it there, because no one must have found, because that was Athena's book in particular. So like no one must have ever found Athena's book in all that time. Like Alanka and Julia might be the only ones who did in all that time. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But once again, the fact is, it struck a chord with her. Like I'm still doubling down on believing that Stanton has to be Athena, but we'll have to wait and see. But then at the very, very end, we have the old lady coming after Alanka, and I'm like, once again, what's this lady's deal? Coming at the worst possible time. But then it wasn't just that. She locked herself in the bathroom, but then like an old man appears in the mirror and you're like, wait, it's been the old lady for so, who the hell are you? Are you like an old married couple that's connected to this place? And in the process, like, I think Alanka might have had like maybe a seizure or something, because she ends up like her eyes kind of flickering and she like passes out. So we'll have to wait to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.